And Father Bill also was a labor priest. He was the one that helped organize the labor unions in this area. And they tried to run him over. One of them, where it was with a case across the river, because he was a radical liberal priest. But justice and encyclicals, Pope Leo and all of them talked about the right to labor to organize. And he not only preached it, he helped do it. And he and that handful of faculty members provided the intellectual underpinnings of the civil rights and labor movement in this area, to their credit. And all they were really doing is echoing the moral philosophy of the Catholic Church back then and the encyclicals of the popes and others. So they were right on target for what they tried to do and did do. And they influenced a lot of students.
Well, personally, how did you get involved?
Well, I was pretty conservative, just typical high school kid. Didn't know really much about anything coming out of school. But, and I had Father Marmaya, who used to preach all this civil rights and activism, but didn't really hit a chord. But one faculty member, mostly Dr. Matthew M. McMahon, who was the PhD head of the political science department, had such an influence on me. We named one of our sons after him. He was godfather. But he sort of gave us the spark, and provided the idealism and the direction of what this country should be all about, what Catholic social teachings are all about. And you know, I became president of the Young Democrats. I was an activist back then and got elected as a sophomore. It was the largest club. I made it on campus. We gave money to people who ran. Harold Hughes, who was an outstanding United States Senator, made a contribution to him, had him come on campus, got involved in a number of other political campaigns. I ran the campaign of Charles Toney, who was a civil rights activist, black welder, excuse me, and the 4th Ward of Davenport. We almost elected him running against 3 white guys. So I learned a lot about pragmatic grassroots politics. And then I participated in the historic March on Washington with Martin Luther King on August 28, 1963.
Can you tell me about that?
Well, it was a historic day. I mean, I remember there were 5 of us from Davenport, mostly under the instigation of people like Father Marv Mottet, Father Jack Smith, and we were, you know, I was picketing here locally and all that. And 5 of us, including Carol Gross, who was from around here, and some other folks, drove all the way out. It was like a 19-hour drive from Davenport to Washington, D.C. We got there, and I just remember all these buses. They had used buses as walls, basically, for security and other purposes. And there were people from all over the country, all colors, all denominations. Labor was heavily represented, AFL-CIO, Walter Reuther, and the United Auto Workers. And there were over 400,000 people assembled on the mall in Washington, D.C. And it was just a historic movement. I mean, a day. I mean, not often do people have a chance to become a part of history, but we certainly were, and we felt it. And that's the day Martin Luther King gave his great speech, "I Have a Dream," you know, and that stuck with me to this day. And you know, it was just a day of sharing. I mean, black, white, all together, and a commitment to justice and decency. And you know, my mother used to tell me, "Oh, don't be careful, they'll get you." You know, she was always worried, as any mother would, because there were some killings later. You know, with Cheney and the boys down in Mississippi, I think, that got killed and buried. You know, and by the people down there and the racists. So, but you know, she came out of a tradition in Ireland of being discriminated against in the power structure, always keeping the Irish down, and I guess that's just got in my blood, and felt I had to fight back, you know, and I felt that, and it was clear that the blacks in this community were greatly discriminated against. It just was our culture. That's the way we were brought up, you know, and I would have been as bad as the rest of them, except I think history and education and having got some good direction from some top faculty and great people, exciting young minds, may help make a difference in my life.
Now, did you see this discrimination in Davenport? Like, let's see, Mr. Toney, did he give any, did you know him well enough that?
Yes, I did. There was Charles Toney and Bill Cribbs, you probably met. He and Charles were barbers. They had their own barber shop down there on 8th and Gaines or whatever, Scott. And, you know, I know Bill Cribbs, who was an outstanding football player, couldn't become a police officer. They claimed he wasn't, you know, had heart problems or some nonsense, but back then they just didn't want blacks on the police department. We didn't get blacks in the police department until well into, I think, early 1970s or something. But sure, that was discrimination. It was less obvious here than it would be in the South, but it was clearly here. The blacks pretty much concentrated, Afro-Americans in one little part of Davenport around Ripley Street, and south around 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th Street around the poorer area there, and a few other pockets. And there were other more aggressive forms of housing, you know. There was clearly discrimination in rental and housing and everything else.
Do you know of anything that was happening at the Arsenal at that time, or?
Oh, the Arsenal had some blacks, but none of them were, none of the institutions that really went out and had the number and aggressively recruited blacks. A few got elected or got appointed to jobs or got jobs, but overall there was an unwritten rule kind of that the blacks would be the last hired and first fired, and they weren't involved much in the labor movement, and you know, all these unions were not that great either at welcoming minorities, and of course there were very few executives of any caliber, any size, responsibility. It's just the way it was back then. We had racism up, and now that's a major change, I think. And now we got Barack Obama running for president of the United States. Now, I didn't think I'd ever live to see the day where we would have a black candidate, Afro-American, an excellent chance. I hope we probably will be elected president of the United States. So there has been fundamental change, but it didn't come about easy. I mean, there's been pressure and debate, you know, picketing and struggles, and the struggle's gone on, and you can never let up from the fight because it's still there. It may not be as outward as it used to be, but there's still racism in this country, and you know, my generation and before were sort of just brought up that way. It's just the way it was.
Now, someone had mentioned that, hopefully this rings a bell to you, the Irish at Corkhill?
Corkhill, yes.
I don't know a lot about.
Well, Corkhill is over around Sacred Heart Cathedral. You got to keep in mind, a lot of people immigrated from Ireland and Germany to the Quad Cities and Davenport, and they were clannish, and they all stuck together. The Irish, the Germans were in the West End around St. Mary's, and the Irish more or less congregated around Corkhill, which was the cathedral was up there and goes back, and they used to have an area down there called the Patch, Cabbage Patch. You know, Irish ate a lot of cabbage, and you know, they were today considered poor, but people were all about the same then. You didn't know you were poor, you didn't have much, but you know, they got by. And that still is an old Irish family still down there today, but that's where most of the Irish sort of settled in Davenport.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I lived across the street, Corkhill Park. It's a park now.
Oh.
But when I grew up, it was a garbage dump. We used to go there on Saturdays and kill rats when they pushed the garbage over and catch on fire. But that was our activities. But you know, it's history now, and it's a park. And, you know, it's changed mostly. Again, it's poor areas, so a lot of minorities, poor people, low-income people. It's the older part of Davenport. It's constantly people trying to better themselves as best they can, but significant amount of crime and other problems because of poverty and ignorance and neglect.